The date today, this is Terry Wager. The date today is March 19th, 2015. I'm making this very short vlog because of the fact that my daughter, Shawna Wagar, is still currently filling my home with paraphernalia, and I'm going to document that right now for video. My daughter, I don't know if you heard that, she just blew her nose. She's in her room right now. She's deliberately and intentionally filling this apartment with paraphernalia. This is it's hard to explain in a sense that it's hard to explain what's going on due to the fact that this is an ongoing thing with these people. My wife, Joan Wagar, got a job at the Multmnomah kitchen in 1999 as a prep cook. Ever since she got that job, she started sleeping around with people in law enforcement, and they turned my wife against me because she was having an affair with somebody in law enforcement. And my wife had everybody on her side of the family turned against me behind my back. They had my oldest daughter, Shawna Wagar, turned against me behind my back. And after only working there for a month and a half, the Multnomah County Sheriff, the people that my wife was sleeping around with, palling around with in law enforcement, after only working there for a month and a half, they told my wife to quit her job at the county jail kitchen to hide and conceal her connections with authorities. And they told her that they were going to help her to set me up as a pedo to get rid of me. And I have been targeted by essentially sting operations ever since. The same day my wife quit her job at the county jail kitchen, it happens to be the same day the county sheriffs filled out the paperwork to take over the surrounding apartments surrounding mine. And my wife and everybody on her side of the family was celebrating my wife's fuck buddies in law enforcement's decision to frame me. Everybody on my wife's side of the family was celebrating it the day my wife quit her job at the county jail kitchen, and then they spent the next couple months, the people that were in law enforcement that took the apartment next door to mine, they spent the next couple months paying Joni and Vicky to turn my yard into a fucking playground. They put multiple large swimming pools and a very large trampoline in my yard. They spent 3 months doing this. And they were arranging to get a double onto my property, a person that is not an exact twin, but a look-alike, somebody that they could use that would pass as a double. And they... right before they put the double on my property, the county sheriffs brought in their longtime favorites, the Dunham family. The Dunham family has a history of assisting the county sheriffs in framing people as pedophiles. They regularly use their own children to pose with the people that the county sheriffs are using as doubles in order to frame people as pedophiles. And I had prior knowledge that they did this. So, anyway, they put a double on my property, and they were using a double on my property, and they were using the Dunham's children to pose with that double when he's on my property. And the county sheriffs were right next door directing the entire thing, and it was them that paid my wife and her sister to turn my yard into a playground with very large, expensive swimming pools and very large, expensive trampolines. And when I kicked this double off my property, that's when the county sheriffs and my wife went after my parents. My wife poisoned my wife, Joan Wagar, poisoned my mother. And at the same time, my wife's fuck buddies in law enforcement on the other side of town, they poisoned my father. So those two poisonings of two different people that are connected to me, that live separately on opposite ends of the town, they were both poisoned at the same time. And my mother called 911 because my wife bragged to her that she poisoned her. So my mother called 911, and the Portland Police and County Sheriffs covered up my mother's 911 call. Did nothing on her complaint, absolutely nothing. They didn't even investigate her complaint. And 3 weeks later, I found out what they did to my father. My father warned me. It took him 3 weeks. He didn't have my phone number. He had no way to contact me by phone, and he was severely poisoned. And it took him about 3 weeks to get well enough to where he could leave his apartment, to come to my apartment to tell me that they poisoned him, and that he was trying to warn me. He feared for my family's safety. He feared for my safety. He feared for my daughter's safety. And 3 days later, my father was dead. And the Multnomah County Sheriffs came to my door to inform me that my father died. And they strongly hinted that they're the ones responsible for his death. And they didn't realize it at the time, but I already knew my wife's fuck buddies in law enforcement were in the apartment right next door. I already knew she was cheating on me. I already knew her fuck buddies in law enforcement took over the surrounding apartments right after my wife quit. I was hanging in there to prove this in self-defense, knowing I was going to be set up. I had the situation well pegged and misjudged the size of it. I didn't realize that they had the blessings of pretty much everybody in law enforcement. I thought it was just my wife and everybody on her side of the family, and my wife's fuck buddy in law enforcement, and maybe one or two or three of his buddies in law enforcement. That was my impression of what it was when I uncovered it, and I basically uncovered their conspiracy to set me up. Today my wife quit, because that's the day my wife and everybody on her side of the family were celebrating it, and we're talking about it, and I overheard them talking about it. And that's essentially how I uncovered everything. And I just misjudged the size of it. I didn't realize they were going to start murdering people and poisoning people and battering people. They blackmailed me after they murdered my father. They were making threats and demands, and everybody that was involved were implying and hinting that my daughters are in danger from these people. It was their way of getting me to do what they want and to get me to remain silent. And so I basically, thinking I was protecting my family, I remained silent and didn't say anything about it. I was afraid. It's like I said, my father warned me about what they did to him, and then they murdered him. So I knew at this point, warning people doesn't get help. It just gets these organized killers to start murdering people. I remained silent because I feared for my family members' safety, my wife and her side of the family, as well as the people that were in law enforcement that were involved in this and were trying to hide the fact that they were in law enforcement. They were implying and hinting to it as well. And so were the Dunham family. Kurt Dunham was hinting at this in 1999. Right before they put the double on my property, Kurt Dunham specifically wanted me to know that him and his family just moved a couple blocks away from where I live. Right after that, that's when the county sheriff put the double on my property. I already had prior knowledge that the county sheriffs and the Dunhams used doubles and photogenic photos to frame people as pedos, and that they used the Dunhams brats to pose with those doubles. I had prior knowledge they did that. So essentially, me and my family were a victim of a very organized and very personal murder conspiracy because of the fact that they weren't really trying to hide it. They were making threats and demands, and I have been targeted ever since by these people. At a certain point, they just outright charged me on 44, made up out of thin air bullshit pedophile felony charges, and I sat in jail for 10 days based on this fabricated 44 bullshit felony charges they made up out of thin air, and then they just released me without explanation. So I had no trial, no opportunity to face my accusers. No explanation for why they pressed the charges, and no explanation as to why they dropped the charges. They just used this act of charging me, arresting me, and then quietly releasing me without any explanations. They just used that as their excuse to vilify me publicly. I found out after the fact that they have a name for this tactic that they use. They call it pedophiling. They just vilify or pedify the living shit out of people they want dead. And they do it with false accusations, and they have their civilian operatives to back up the bullshit complaints. I was being blackmailed from this point forward. My wife and her daughter were trying to give me the impression that they were bullied into making these accusations after I was released. My wife and daughter were pretending to be a loving family and were pretending to be on my side. And they were pretending they were afraid of these law officers. The whole time they were trying to hide the fact, because they're guilty of murder. So the whole time they were trying to hide the fact that they were being coached and directed and paid and funded by the county sheriffs in this operation of theirs. They were trying to hide their motive, in other words. The entire time, they thought I didn't know what's going on. The entire time, they thought I was unaware that they were helping the county sheriffs and the Dunham family to frame me for shit. They thought I didn't know. I uncovered everything the day it started, the day of its inception. Well, it may not be the day it started, but it's the day it's the beginning day of them executing their plan. Because the day the county sheriffs made the decision they are going to frame me is the same day that they told my wife to quit her job to conceal connections with the county sheriffs. And it's the same day the county sheriffs filled out paperwork to take over the surrounding apartments. And it's the same day they started looking into people that they could use for as a double, and within the next day or two they brought in a double. And all of this is what my wife and her side of the family, on the day my wife quit her job at the county jail kitchen, on that day, this is what my wife and her side of the family were celebrating. And they were celebrating this in front of my face, on my property, and they were openly celebrating it. And I specifically asked them all, what are you people all celebrating? And they were all grinning and smirking at me. They didn't give a shit if I knew they're celebrating, and they didn't care if my guard or my suspicions went up or not. They didn't give a rat shit. They didn't care. And my wife and my wife's sister and my wife's sister's son, who would be my nephew, he was, they were all hinting at this. They were hinting at what was going on. They didn't want to admit to me what was going on, but they were having fun implying as to what was going on and hinting at it. And they weren't keeping track of the hints they were giving me. In other words, my wife would give me hints when her other family members weren't around to hear it. And when my wife wasn't around, my wife's sister and her nephew were giving me hints that my wife was unaware of. And after this, my wife's mother and her father showed up, and they joined in on this celebration. Basically, almost everybody on my wife's side of the family showed up on my property that evening, and they were celebrating. And my wife's mother, Donna Minor, she just flat out blurted out the fact that the county sheriffs were going to be taking over the surrounding apartments. And Vicky, my wife's sister, Vicky Rosales, with a big-ass Cheshire grin on her face, quickly changed the subject and was started talking over Donna Minor as a way of interrupting her to get her to shut the fuck up, because I was standing right behind Donna Minor when she said this, and they didn't want me to know this. And it was very obvious that Vicky Rosales interrupted her for the purpose of getting her to shut the fuck up. And they were all grinning and laughing about this. And this is what they were openly celebrating on my property, right in front of my face. I had enough information to know that these people were my enemies. I already knew my wife was cheating on me. I didn't make any mention of it. I didn't confront my wife over it. I already knew that my wife was cheating on me, so my guard was already up. So when this celebration shit was going on, my guard was already up. My guard was up ever since she got the job at the county jail kitchen, because of the simple fact that that's when she started showing signs that she didn't love me anymore, and there were signs that she was having an affair. Just because I chose not to confront her over the fact that I knew she was cheating doesn't change the fact I knew she was cheating. So my guard was already up. So the day my wife quit, everybody was hinting that basically shit's going on and that it was going to fuck me over. And they wanted me to know. This is what they were hinting at. And they were giving me all kinds of hints to imply that major shit is going on and that it was going to fuck me over, and that this is what they're celebrating. Because I specifically asked them, what are you people celebrating? And they clearly and deliberately did not want to specifically tell me what they're celebrating, and instead they chose, while grinning and smirking, to hint at it. Now, is this enough for me to know they're my enemies? Yes, it is. In disgust, I walked away from them. And by the time I got about 20 feet away from them, keep in mind, they're on my property. I'm at my home, at my duplex apartment at that time, back in 1999. And as I walked through the threshold of my doorway, that's when they all started talking about it amongst each other, thinking I can't overhear. I was overhearing just fucking fine. Now, I made the decision because they think I don't know what's going on. And I'm finding out from them that my wife's fuck buddies in law enforcement are going to be taking over the surrounding apartments, and that they're going to be setting me up as a pedo, and that everybody on my wife's side of the family was on board with this, and that this is what they are openly celebrating in front of my face on my property. Now, they're under the impression I didn't know. And the reason they're under that impression is, one, they're stupid as hell. And two, my guard was already up. I had no intention of confiding in them or confronting them, because what good, all that would do is warn them that I know. I'm not the type of person that gets scared of anything. I'm a good person. I have a history of saving lives. I have a history of doing the right thing, too. And I'm used to dealing with emergency situations. I've had quite a few years of experience dealing with emergency situations. I was debating at this point whether I should leave and try to warn people that my wife and everybody on her side of the family are in conspiracy with their fuck buddies in law enforcement to set me up for shit, or if I should hang in there and prove it. And the reason I was debating on this is because I had enough information to know how to prove it. They gave me more than enough vital information to know how to prove it. And that's the day my wife quit. So I basically uncovered everything the day the county sheriffs made their decision to frame me. It's the day I uncovered it. So they didn't even have the apartment next door to me yet. But they filled out the paperwork that day to get 72-hour notices to put on the surrounding apartments surrounding mine, so that they could take over the surrounding apartments. I confirmed this the next morning. I confirmed it because the very next morning there were 72-hour notices on my next door neighbor's apartment, of which was not there the night before. So that was my confirmation that everything I overheard my wife and everybody on her side of the family talking about was going to take place and was going to happen. And that this is what they're celebrating. So I had enough information to know how to prove it. And I was debating on what actions I should take in regards in self-defense. I deemed it automatically an illegal criminal conspiracy. I didn't necessarily think of it in terms of it being a sting operation yet, because of the simple fact that I was under the false belief that most people in law enforcement are good, and that there's just a few bad apples. And I was under the impression it was a few bad apples kind of people in law enforcement that gave my wife permission and her family permission to set me up. I did not have. I basically had the whole thing pretty well pegged and figured out, and just completely misjudged the size of it. I was under the false belief that if I hung in there and prove it, I'd be able to get help. I'd be able to report it and get help. That was a false belief on my part, because of the simple fact that the whole damn police department, the whole goddamn county sheriff's department, they're all corrupt, and they all do this to people, and that this is sport to law enforcement. They recruited my wife into affairs, so she literally became, if you think of law enforcement like as though they're a clan, if you think of them and their civilian buddies and their civilian relatives and their civilian girlfriends as a clan, then you understand law enforcement much, much more than you could ever imagine, because that's essentially what they are. And they all lie for one another, and they all cover for one another, and they don't give a fuck about the law. They're organized, and they're very organized, and they are so organized that they gang up on the people that they target. They deliberately and intentionally took over the surrounding departments so that they could coach my wife and her oldest daughter as to how to frame me and how to set me up for their video surveillance, while they make arrangements to bring in a double and to bring in the Dunham family, because they always use the Dunham family brats to pose with doubles. They have a history of it. The county sheriffs and the Dunhams did this to people in the Selwood neighborhood in the early 70s. I already had prior knowledge that they did this to people. Now, I made the decision to hang in there and prove it, and in self-defense, because I knew no matter what, I came to the realization that if I leave and try to warn people, well, that don't change the fact county sheriffs already made the decision, and I'm already aware they made the decision. No matter what, they intend on framing me for shit. So if they're going to bring in doubles, then it's not an investigation, and their intent is to frame. So in self-defense, I hung in there to prove it. And I knew exactly how to prove it. They gave me so much vital information right at the onset of the whole thing that I knew exactly how to prove it. What I didn't realize was the size of it. And I didn't realize they were targeting other people. Now, in 2005, they started up again, essentially. The Portland Police and County Sheriffs battered me at Eastport Walmart. And it was my wife that got me into that situation. And my daughters were trying to hide the fact that they joined into this shit. And they deliberately and intentionally battered me, and then they left me there in the parking lot. And nobody called for an ambulance for me. Everybody pretended nothing's wrong and nothing happened. Everybody at Eastport Walmart pretended nothing's wrong and nothing happened. Nobody called for an ambulance for me. Nobody. Nobody. And I found out 2 months later, well, I had a broken rib and a fucked up knee from that being battered. I was being gang stalked by the Portland Police and County Sheriffs. While they're in plain clothing, from this point forward, I was being gang stalked by a Portland police officer by the name of Officer Eric Carlson, and he was openly and actively having an affair and was palling around and sleeping around with my wife and her daughters and with my wife's sister during this time frame. And my wife and her daughters and my wife's sister's co-workers at Eastport Walmart and Clackamas Walmart later on are fully aware of this. My wife and her daughters were not hiding their sexual affairs that they were having with cops from their coworkers at all. Everybody at Eastport Walmart and everybody at Clackamas Walmart that worked in 2005 through 2007 in both of those stores are witnesses to my wife and my wife's sister and my wife's daughters palling around with and sleeping around with Portland cops and with Multnomah County Sheriff officers. And they were even palling around with Oregon State troopers. So they're not really hiding their connections with law enforcement from other people. There's a lot of people that are witness to this. Now, when I found out that my wife was sleeping around with Officer Eric Carlson and found out that the dude dyed his hair blonde so that he could impersonate me and that this was open knowledge at Eastport Walmart, I tried to warn people about it. And I keep in mind, I still have my broken rib and fucked up knee. I'm still in a debilitated condition. They had me in a debilitated condition. When I found out that Officer Eric Carlson dyed his hair blonde and that he's the cop that's sleeping with my wife and that he dyed his hair blonde so he could impersonate me and that this was open knowledge at Eastport Walmart, I tried to warn people about it, and that's when my wife, Joan Wagar, poisoned me. Now, when she poisoned me, it debilitated me so badly I couldn't walk, I couldn't talk, I couldn't leave my apartment, I couldn't do anything. It was so difficult. I couldn't even breathe. I mean, I had to struggle just to breathe. Okay, that's how badly poisoned I was. And I was surrounded by my wife and her daughters, and they were pretending nothing's wrong. Literally. They were being coached by the Portland police and county sheriffs to just pretend nothing's wrong. Have you ever seen the movie Misery? You ever see how that bitch has that dude, that writer dude, debilitated and has him in a bed where he can't get out of bed and he can't do anything? And she keeps him that way, and she just pretends everything's normal, everything's fine. That's what my wife and her daughters were doing. Literally. They didn't give a shit that I was poisoned. They didn't give a shit I was debilitated. They just pretended nothing's wrong. The whole time, my wife and her daughters were palling around and sleeping around with Portland cops. And this was open knowledge at Eastport Walmart. And it was my wife's coworkers at Eastport Walmart that nicknamed Officer Eric Carlson. They gave him the nickname Double Click. And they were referring to him by that nickname. And my wife was using that nickname in her cell phone contact list. She referred to Officer Eric Carlson in her cell phone by that nickname Double Click. And she was using that nickname as a way of making it known to her daughters that she was hinting to her daughters that her new best friend, which that's how she was referring to Double Click, Officer Eric Carlson, she was referring to him as a twin. And she was, but she didn't want to say in front of me who he is a twin to. But she was using it as a means of hinting to her daughters. She was recruiting her daughters, Megan and Kaylee, into it, and she was hinting to her daughters that they were using him as a double. And they're very fond of hinting, especially when they're near or within hearing range of their victims, their targets, their victims. They hint because they don't want to outright admit, so they hint. So that's what my wife was hinting about to our daughters. And after 2 weeks after my wife poisoned me, my wife admitted to our daughters that everybody at Eastport Walmart gave her a new nickname. And she said that they call her Mrs. Dash. And she was telling her daughters this in a way in other words, she was hinting to her daughters that she poisoned me, and she was seeking her daughters' approval. And ironically, our daughter, Megan Wagar, spoke up, and she hinted back by saying that she approves of that nickname. That's a very unusual thing to say under the circumstance, but that's exactly what she said. And this is how they were hinting at one another. She was seeking their permission and their blessings, and they gave it. Now, I'm already in a debilitated condition, and I'm aware at this point this is a murder conspiracy, and at this point I had every reason to believe that the Portland Police and County Sheriffs had the surrounding apartment surrounding mine, and that they probably had our apartment bugged at the time as well. They had our apartment illegally bugged in 1999, so for my wife's fuck buddies law enforcement, it's par for the course. They take over the surrounding area in order to control the area around their target, and they always bring in somebody that they could use as a double. And since they had my wife and daughters on board with their shit, all they had to worry about was making me look like a bad guy. That's all they worried about. That's all they concentrated on. They didn't give a shit anymore if I knew or if I suspected as to what was going on. They already poisoned me. They broke my rib and fucked up my knee. They got me debilitated, and I was quite literally surrounded by the Portland Police and County Sheriffs that had the surrounding apartments surrounding mine. And these were the people that my wife and her daughters were sleeping around with. My wife and daughters were actively sleeping around with these sting operatives, and they were vilifying me behind my back while I was debilitated and bedridden. Literally, they just ran around the neighborhood. They spread false rumors about me. Keep in mind, I'm in a debilitated condition. I'm literally bedridden. I'm poisoned. I can't talk. I'm bleeding internally. And they ran around the neighborhood and vilified me with false accusations. And since they had my wife and daughters were sleeping around with these cops, they were on board with all this shit and were helping these cops to do this crap. And the whole time they were using Officer Eric Carlson. He's a Portland cop, and he's a brunette. But they were using him as a double. So the son of a bitch dyed his hair blonde so that he could impersonate me, and then they would stage crimes near where I live or near places that I have a history with, like past places that I worked at, like past employers and stuff like that, where they'll stage a crime. It only takes them 5-10 minutes to do this kind of shit. Officer Eric Carlson already has his hair dyed to look like me. He's a close look-alike. He's not an exact twin, but he's a damn close look-alike. And they would just take photogenic side shots or photogenic back shots of Officer Eric Carlson while he's dressed like me at locations where I'm known to be at or have been at in the past. And they stage and commit crimes. And then they do this for the purpose of vilifying me behind my back and to make me look like a bad guy to other people. And this is how they were recruiting other people into it. In 2007, they had everybody at Clacvkamas Walmart on board with this. And they were vilifying me for crimes that these officers committed. In 2007, my wife, Joan Wagar, and her daughter, Kaylee Wagar, assisted their two fuck buddies in the Portland Police Department, Officer Eric Carlson and Officer John Ray. They assisted them in committing a break-in and a rape and a homicide. And there were two other female officers that were involved in this, one going by the first name of Adrian, and there was another female officer by the first name of Erica that was involved in this. So there were several of them, and they staged and committed a break-in and a rape and a murder, and they were using Officer Eric Carlson as a photo double. Both Officer Eric Carlson and Officer John Ray committed the break-in. Joni was the one that let them into my apartment through her bedroom window. She's the one that let them in, and they were posing for photogenic photos in our daughter's bedroom. I was in the apartment at the time and sound asleep.